Oakhaven, Alistair began, his gaze distant, was a place that time seemed to forget, and perhaps for good reason. Our lives were simple, dictated by the changing, or rather, the unchanging seasons of the high peaks. The most notable feature, apart from the oppressive mountains, was the Whispering Mire. It lay a mile east of the village, a vast, treacherous wetland that locals said had no bottom. Fog clung to it year-round, a milky, silent sentinel, and it was said that the mire, it shifted. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Not just the land, you understand. The very air above it felt different each time you approached. Sometimes, familiar paths would vanish, swallowed by glistening black mud. Other times, new, inviting trails would appear, leading deeper into its heart, baited traps for the unwary. Old Man Hemlock, the village elder, claimed the mire was alive, a hungry entity that reshaped itself to lure in sustenance. Lily shivered, pulling her knees to her chest. Tom's eyes were like saucers. My closest friend then was a lad named Finian. Alistair continued, a flicker of warmth in his eyes quickly doused by shadow. Finn was reckless, always eager to prove his bravery. I was more cautious. Finn became obsessed with the mire's secrets. He spoke of lights, seen dancing deep within its foggy embrace on moonless nights, of faint, beckoning music that no one else could hear. The mire calls to me, Alistair, he'd say, his eyes alight with a feverish gleam. I warned him, pleaded with him. Everyone did. But Finn wouldn't listen. One late autumn afternoon, the sky the color of a fresh bruise, Finn announced he was going to find the source of the lights. He'd fashioned a sturdy wooden plank to help cross the softer patches and carried a satchel with bread, cheese, and a flickering lantern. I begged him not to go. The mire is hungry today, Finn, I told him, repeating Old Man Hemlock's dire pronouncements. I can feel it. He just laughed, clapped me on the shoulder, and said he'd be back by nightfall with a grand story to tell. Alistair paused, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Night fell, a deep, suffocating dark. Finn didn't return. The next morning, a search party was formed. I was among them, my heart a cold stone in my chest. We followed his initial tracks to the mire's edge. The plank he'd carried lay a few feet into the bog, half sunk in oily water. Of Finn, there was no sign, no cry, no struggle. It was as if the Whispering Mire had simply opened its maw and swallowed him whole. The loss of Finn cast a pall over Oakhaven, heavier than the usual mountain gloom. Alistair resumed, his voice heavy with remembered grief. I, for one, felt his absence like a missing limb. I started spending more time alone, often wandering the edges of the forest that bordered the mire, never too close, but close enough to feel its presence. It was during one such melancholic ramble, about a month after Finn's disappearance, that I first saw it. He paused, and the children leaned in, breathless. It wasn't a creature, not in the traditional sense. It was a figure, standing at the very edge of the mire, where the skeletal trees gave way to the fog-shrouded reeds. Tall and impossibly thin, draped in what looked like pale, tattered cloth that blended seamlessly with the ever-present mist. It had no discernible face, just a suggestion of a head, tilted slightly as if listening or watching. The first time I saw it, I froze. My blood turned to ice water. It wasn't doing anything, just standing there, motionless, silent. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, a strangely shaped deadwood branch draped with lichen. But when I opened my eyes, it was still there. And then, slowly, so slowly I almost didn't perceive it, one of its long, thin arms began to rise, pointing not at me, but deeper into the mire, towards the area where Finn was last seen. Did you go towards it, Grandpa? Lily whispered, her voice tight. Alistair shook his head. Fear, primal and absolute, rooted me to the spot. I felt an overwhelming urge to flee, but also a strange, horrifying pull towards that gesturing arm. It felt persuasive, not with words, but with a deeper, more insidious suggestion that whispered directly into my mind. Come, see what lies hidden. Come, find what you seek. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the marrow, that it was referring to Finn. I tore my gaze away, turned, and ran. I didn't stop running until I burst through the door of my own cottage, gasping for breath, my mother looking at me with wide, concerned eyes. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words caught in my throat. How could I describe something so unnatural, so utterly alien? Over the next few weeks, I saw the Pale Watcher several times more, always in the same spot, always when I was alone. It never moved closer, never made a sound, but each time, that slow, beckoning gesture, and each time, that silent, mental invitation. I started to believe I was going mad. No one else reported seeing it. When I tentatively asked Old Man Hemlock about such a figure, his weathered face grew even grayer. He just shook his head slowly and muttered, "Some things that belong to the mire should stay with the mire. Don't look too long, boy. It learns your face." Old Man Hemlock's words were a cold comfort, but they planted a seed of deeper dread. Alistair said, his gaze fixed on the flames, as if seeing those desolate marshes within them. If the Pale Watcher could learn my face, what else could it learn? What else could it do? The dreams started soon after. At first they were vague, unsettling things. Fog, the scent of damp earth, the feeling of being lost. But they grew more specific, more vivid. I would find myself standing at the edge of the Whispering Mire. The Pale Watcher before me, its arm outstretched. In the dream, unlike in waking life, I would feel an irresistible compulsion to obey. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. I'd step into the mire. The mud would suck at my boots, cold and greedy. The fog would swirl, and shapes would appear within it, twisted, human-like forms, their faces obscured, their limbs contorted. And then I'd hear Finn's voice, faint and echoing, as if calling from a great distance. "Alistair, help me, I'm so cold." In the dream, I'd push forward, desperate to reach him, the Pale Watcher always just ahead, guiding me deeper and deeper. The air would grow heavy, thick with the smell of decay and something elsey, something cloyingly sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot. The ground beneath my feet would become more treacherous, the pools of stagnant water deeper. And just as I felt I was about to reach Finn, just as I thought I could see his pale hand reaching out from the mists, I would wake up, tangled in my bedsheets, my heart pounding, my skin clammy with cold sweat. Tom whimpered softly, burrowing closer to Lily. These dreams became a nightly torment. Alistair continued, his voice strained. I grew gaunt, shadows appearing under my eyes. My waking hours were filled with a gnawing anxiety, a constant fear of falling asleep. The line between dream and reality began to blur. Sometimes, during the day, I'd catch a whiff of that sickly sweet smell, or hear a faint whisper that sounded like Finn's voice on the wind. The village physician, a well-meaning but limited man, prescribed chamomile tea and rest. My parents watched me with growing concern. I tried to tell them about the dreams, about the Watcher, but they exchanged worried glances, likely thinking grief had unhinged me. How could they understand the insidious nature of it? The way it was slowly, methodically reeling me in. One morning, I woke up, and my boots, which I always left by the door, were caked in fresh, black mud, mire mud. There was no other mud like it in Oakhaven. I had no memory of leaving my bed, no memory of walking in my sleep. But the evidence was undeniable. The Pale Watcher wasn't just in my dreams anymore. It was drawing me out, physically, while I slept, leading my unconscious body towards the mire's embrace. Alistair picked up his glass, his hand trembling slightly, and took a slow sip. The fire had died down a little, and the room seemed darker, the shadows deeper. The muddy boots were a terrifying revelation, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I knew then that I was in mortal danger. This wasn't just grief or nightmares. This was something actively hunting me, using my love for Finn as bait. I became desperate. I barricaded my door at night, wedging a chair under the handle. I even tied a rope from my wrist to my bedpost, hoping it would wake me if I tried to leave. For a few nights, it seemed to work. The dreams still came, still filled with Finn's desperate calls and the beckoning figure, but I would wake up in my own bed. The rope still secure, the door still barred. I started to hope, just a little, that I could resist it. Then came the night of the new moon. The darkness outside was absolute, a thick, inky blanket over Oakhaven. That night, the dream was different, more potent, more real. I was in the mire again, the pale watcher leading the way. But this time, Finn was closer. I could see his face, pale and drawn, his eyes wide with terror. He was holding something out to me. Alistair's voice cracked. It was Elara's locket. Elara was my younger sister, no older than you, Lily. She had adored Finn. He'd given her a small, silver locket for her 7th birthday, shaped like a songbird. She never took it off. In my dream, Finn was holding that locket, his voice pleading, "Take it, Alistair. It's all I have left, please." The sight of that locket, something so precious, so real. In Finn's spectral hand, it broke through my defenses. The urge to reach him, to take the locket, to save him, was overwhelming. All thoughts of the pale watcher, of the danger, vanished. There was only Finn and Elara's locket. I woke with a jolt, not in my bed, but standing in the cold, damp air outside my cottage. The rope lay frayed on the floor by my bed, not untied, but snapped. The chair was pushed aside from the door, the heavy bar lifted. I had no memory of doing any of it. My feet were bare, sinking slightly into the cold earth, and in my hand, clutched so tightly my knuckles were white, was Elara's silver locket. Lily gasped. But how? Alistair shook his head, his eyes haunted. I don't know. I stumbled back inside, chilled to the bone, my mind reeling. I rushed to Elara's small room. She was asleep, her breathing soft and even. I reached for her neck, my fingers trembling, dreading what I would find. Or rather, what I wouldn't. The chain was still there. But the locket was gone. The thing in my hand was identical, Elara's locket. But it couldn't be. Unless the mire, or the watcher, hadn't just taken Finn. Unless it could now reach beyond its borders, into our homes, into our lives, stealing not just people, but pieces of them, pieces of their memories, their attachments, to use as lures. The stolen locket was the final straw, Alistair declared, his voice gaining a grim resolve. This thing, this pale watcher, this hungry mire, had taken my best friend, and now it was using the image of my beloved sister to draw me to my doom. It was personal. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it was mingled with a burning anger. I couldn't fight it in my sleep. I couldn't trust my own mind. I had to confront it in the waking world, on my own terms, if such a thing was even possible. I knew it was likely a suicide mission. But the thought of my spirit, my essence, being trapped in that wretched bog, calling out to others, was a fate worse than death. The next day, I told no one of my plan. I took the sturdiest rope I could find, a sharp hunting knife, and a tinderbox. And I took the locket, the one from my dream, the one that felt cold as death in my palm. As I approached the mire's edge, the familiar fog swirled, thicker than usual, and the sickly sweet smell was almost overpowering. And there it was, the pale watcher, waiting. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked towards it. As I drew closer, for the first time, I noticed details I hadn't before. The cloth it wore seemed to writhe subtly, like 1,000 pale worms. And beneath the suggestion of a head, I thought I saw, not eyes, but hollows, impossibly deep and dark, that seemed to drink the light. Its arm was still outstretched, beckoning. The silent command echoed in my mind, "Come. He is waiting. She is waiting. It now knew about Alara, knew that a part of her, symbolized by the locket, was also a tether. I held up the locket in my hand. "Is this what you want?" I shouted, my voice hoarse. "Is this how you hunt?" The watcher didn't respond, but the fog around it seemed to churn. And then, from the mists behind it, shapes began to resolve. Not just Finn, but others. Men, women. Even a child I vaguely recognized from a neighboring hamlet who had vanished years ago. Their forms were indistinct, their faces masks of sorrow and despair, their eyes empty. They were like puppets, their movements jerky and unnatural. And I realized, with a horrifying clarity, what the Pale Watcher was. Alistair leaned forward, his eyes boring into his grandchildren. It wasn't a guardian of the mire, or even its spirit. It was the mire, or rather, it was the collective consciousness of all those it had consumed. It was an amalgamation of stolen lives, a predatory entity that wore the guise of their grief and longing to ensnare others. Each victim became another lure, another voice in its spectral choir, another thread in its shifting tapestry of deceit. Finn stepped forward, or rather, the image of Finn. His lips moved, but the voice that came out was not his own. It was a chorus, a symphony of whispers, all speaking as one. "Join us, Alistair. It is peaceful here. No more pain, no more sorrow. Only completion." The room was silent save for the crackling fire and Tom's quiet sniffles. Alistair's face was grim, illuminated by the dying embers. "Peaceful. Completion." Alistair scoffed, the memory still raw. I looked at those hollow-eyed specters, those puppets of despair, and I knew it was a lie. This was not peace, it was oblivion, an endless, conscious torment. My anger, my grief for Finn, my terror for Alara, it all coalesced into a single, desperate resolve. I knew I couldn't fight it physically, not in the conventional sense. It wasn't truly there, not in a way I could cut or stab. It was a thing of mist and shadow, of stolen souls and broken minds. But Old Man Hemlock had once said the mire hated two things: true iron and fire. I didn't have true iron, but I had my tinderbox. The edge of the mire was littered with dead reeds, dry grasses, and the brittle, skeletal branches of long, dead trees, perfect kindling. The Pale Watcher, and its chorus of phantoms, began to drift closer, their ethereal forms gliding over the treacherous ground. The sweet, cloying smell intensified, making me gag. Its many voices whispered again, "It is inevitable, Alistair. You cannot resist the pull. You are already part of us." A cold tendril of mist, colder than death, brushed my cheek. That was when I acted. With trembling hands, I struck flint against steel. Once, twice, a spark caught on the tinder. I cupped it, nurturing the tiny flame, then thrust it into a clump of dry reeds. They caught instantly, the fire leaping upwards with a hungry whoosh. The wind, which had been so still, suddenly seemed to pick up, fanning the flames. The reaction from the Pale Watcher and its spectral entourage was immediate and horrifying. A sound ripped through the air, not a scream, but a discordant shriek, 1,000 voices crying out in agony and rage. The figures flickered and writhed, their forms distorting as if in unbearable pain. The Watcher itself recoiled, its tall form seeming to shrink, its pale tatters thrashing wildly. The beckoning arm dropped. The fire spread with astonishing speed, leaping from reed bed to deadwood, creating a blazing wall between me and the mire's heart. The heat was intense, the smoke acrid. Through the roaring flames and billowing smoke, I saw the phantoms retreating, dissolving back into the deeper fog, their shrieks fading into a sorrowful, guttural moan. The Pale Watcher, its form now indistinct and wavering, gave one last, baleful look towards me before it too was swallowed by the smoke and mist. I didn't wait. I turned and fled, the roar of the fire and the unearthly wails pursuing me. I didn't know if I had destroyed it or merely driven it back, but I knew I had hurt it. I had shown it that not all would come willingly to its cold embrace. Alistair fell silent, staring into the embers. The story seemed to have reached its climax, its fiery resolution. Lily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Alistair finally looked up, a profound sadness in his eyes. The fire burned for 2 days, consuming a large swath of the mire's edge. When it finally died down, the landscape was charred, blackened, sterile. The Pale Watcher was not seen again, not by me, nor by anyone else in Oakhaven, as far as I know. The dreams stopped. The locket in my possession, the one from the mire, crumbled to dust in my hand the morning after the fire, as if its connection to that place was severed. And Alara's locket? Lily asked softly. It was back around her neck, Alistair said, a faint smile touching his lips. She woke up that morning and touched it, a little confused, saying she'd had a strange dream about losing it. She never knew how close she came, how close I came. So you defeated it,
Grandpa,
Tom said, a note of triumph in his voice. His fear momentarily forgotten. Alistair's smile faded. He looked at his grandchildren, his gaze lingering on them, an unreadable expression on his face. Did I, Thomas? Did I really defeat it? He sighed, a deep, weary sound. I left Oakhaven not long after. I couldn't bear the shadows of that place, the memory of Finn, the constant awareness of what lay beneath the surface of the world. I traveled far, lived a long life, saw many things. I built this house, Blackwood Manor, on solid ground, far from any marsh or mire. He leaned forward, his voice dropping again, conspiratorial, yet different this time. Less like a storyteller, more like someone sharing a terrible secret. But some nights, when the wind howls just so around the eaves of this old house, and the fire burns low in the hearth. He paused, and a log in the fireplace suddenly collapsed, sending a shower of embers into the grate, making both children jump. Some nights, Alistair continued, his eyes glinting strangely in the renewed flicker of the flames, I still smell it. That faint, sickly sweet scent, like overripe fruit, left to rot. Lily and Tom stared at him, their earlier relief evaporating, replaced by a new, creeping unease. Alistair's lips curved into a slow, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a knowing, almost predatory expression they had never seen on his familiar, kindly face. The mire taught me many things, children. About loss, about fear, but mostly, his smile widened, showing a hint of teeth that seemed, in the dim light, unnaturally sharp. It taught me about hunger, and how to wait. He slowly extended a wrinkled hand, his fingers long and thin, much like they described the Pale Watchers. His gaze was fixed on them, intense and possessive. You see, he whispered, the sound like dry reeds rustling. Oakhaven was just a place. The true mire, the one that shifts and beckons, the one that collects, it can be anywhere. Even in a comfortable old house, by a warm fireside. His eyes, which they now saw were not the familiar warm brown of their grandfather, but held a deep, hollow darkness, flickered towards the grand, ornate mirror above the mantelpiece. For a fleeting, terrifying instant, reflected in the glass, they didn't see their grandfather. They saw a tall, impossibly thin figure, draped in pale, tattered cloth, its head tilted as if listening. And from that reflected figure, a long, thin arm began to rise, pointing not at the mirror, but out into the room, towards them. And it has learned your faces very, very well. Alistair, or the thing that wore his guise, murmured, its voice now a chorus of faint, beckoning whispers. Welcome, my dears. Welcome to the collection. The last log in the fireplace crumbled into glowing ash, plunging the room into near darkness, filled only with the children's stifled screams and the soft, rustling sound of something ancient, patient, and terribly hungry, finally drawing its newest treasures into its shadowy embrace.